Okay, we're at the last fifth panel for the Carbon Summit, and it's been a ride. We've covered a lot of information today and yesterday, and this is maybe my favorite topic to talk about because there's just so much going on in the space. And one of the things that we're going to have to start with is introductions, kind of backgrounds, and maybe your research and education within the topic of sustainability. So would you like to kick us off?
Sarah Basset. I'm a professor of practice in the School of Public Affairs. I wear a couple different hats, so I both sort of teach and do that piece, but certainly span both research and practice-based work. My background is largely in actually urban planning and policy, but really helping to think through the way we can connect community need with policy action, and particularly looking over that long-term horizon. I do a lot of work around the disaster community, so particularly hazard mitigation and community adaptation to climate hazards. I've also worked in some of the disaster recovery long-term piece as well, all over the U.S. So I worked for many years on the East Coast, and then I'm a little bit new to ASU, just been here 2 years. So certainly working a lot in the extreme heat space currently.
Okay.
Alrighty, Ashley Wiseman, Executive Director of Greenlight Solutions, and what we do is our mission is to educate and empower the next generation of sustainability leaders. And really we do that by helping students launch their sustainability careers and help businesses go green. And we're actually celebrating 10 years of impact this year. And we started, and we started right here at the ASU School of Sustainability by undergraduates that said, hey, we want to get applied learning in sustainability. How can we do that? And, we've been kind of filling that applied learning gap ever since.
My name is Nicholas Plarski. I'm an associate professor here in the Schools of Arts, Media, and Engineering, as well as the Sidney Poitier New American Film School. I focus on emerging technologies and how these convey information, particularly along the lines of sustainability and kind of community fissures. And how do we use this practice of storytelling in order to make particularly young people more engaged, more hopeful, and more action-oriented.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Kevin Dooley. I'm a professor in supply chain management and also chief scientist at the Sustainability Consortium. Consortium has been around for 15 years now, and we do work with the largest retailers and consumer goods companies around. So, and we do so in a collective action way. And so, for example, one of the collective action projects that we're working on is how to make small packaging curbside recyclable. So all the small stuff that you have shouldn't go in that recycling bin either, because technically it's not recyclable, but we're working on that wicked problem to change that.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Kevin. Sarah, as an educator in STEM, how do you integrate sustainability concepts into STEM curricula?
That's a great question. In curricula, I think a really important piece of the STEM education pipeline is creativity, actually, is creating sort of a space, often in the sciences. Let me back up. I think science and sort of arts are actually linked because they both require and demand a really strong attenuation to play and creativity. It's really hard to find solutions to complex problems, and there's something important to that space to think openly about sort of different pathways of solving those problems. And so for me, in my work, I think a lot about how we can create that space that's really sort of an open and dynamic and interactive environment to think through some of these really hard and complex problems. So I draw from multiple different disciplines, but in any STEM-related work, I'm sort of thinking about particularly that creative opportunity to collaborate, and particularly across disciplines, to address that.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Is the the science, or it's the STEAM aspect. Like that's probably my favorite aspect is the arts. because I'm a visual learner. Like, I wasn't good in math. I mean, the addition, multiplication, division, those maths were okay for me. But once I started to get into the higher level, the calculus, the trigonometry, differential equations, it didn't make sense to me because I couldn't visualize it. And so that's where the art piece is, would you say, is the kind of the most important, is really bringing concepts into reality?
I was actually just having a conversation yesterday with a group of scientists about the way we think and the way we actually process information. And it was interesting because across this table of individuals, I would say about 90%, and this was a small group, are visual learners, and they're scientists in much more, everything from nanotechnology and biology. And we were thinking about the way we approach some of these problems, and exactly as you described, it was visual in nature. And so, to me, as we address these different questions and in education, it's really a focus on how do we hit all the different methods of pedagogy in order to arrive at that? And in STEM, I think visual learning and creativity is paramount.
And so that segues into a question for Ashley, is why is applied learning, in sustainability so important?
Absolutely. So our main program that we've had for 10 years, we've implemented 86 student-led sustainability projects. So students get out in the real world and they can apply what they've learned in the classroom, working with businesses to help those businesses meet their sustainability goals. So, we talk a lot about that first job maybe in sustainability can be really tough. It's like you need that 5 years experience on those job descriptions. Well, how do you get that experience? Greenlight comes in and you can actually do multiple projects with Greenlight. Your entire resume will be sustainability work out in the field. And really those are skills you can't get in the classroom. That experience in interpersonal skills and how to articulate a vision, how to create a strategy with milestones, who does what and when, the list goes on really. And really, that's our students' number one talking point in job interviews, which really goes back to why applied learning is so crucial to sustainability and being able to be effective once you enter the workforce.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. I would call, I kind of call it experiential learning, but applied learning. I mean, applied sustainability solutions, I guess, is my program. So I think we're talking about the same things here. And for Nicholas, as both STEM and sustainability, emerging tech, and where you're at, how is sustainability being immersive into the arts and the film?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is something, I actually co-run a lab here on campus with Sarah, and she has this way of saying it is we need to create storytelling for policy advocacy. So how do you do that? Like, how do you get someone to do the next step? Not the first step. That's part of it. But it's like we can't just create. Actually, there's some very interesting cases like against the concept of empathy. The reason is because empathy is you feel empathy, but then that's the first step in a process. It can't just be there. Of course, empathy is important, but we have to think about it on a continuum or a spectrum. So how are you going to get someone to move from empathy then into action? That's actually the question that we're asking. And immersive tech is very interesting because it doesn't just tell someone what to think. It allows someone to play through a possibility and arrive at a conclusion themselves. And that's a lot more powerful. I mean, even to what you do, there's something about this hands-on learning process that you see. If I do X, then Y occurs. And if I do Z, then P occurs. And then actually being able to have a process to think through that is really, really important. So we're really interested in developing kind of both the technologies and the methods of storytelling in immersive spaces, whether that be virtual reality, augmented reality, mixed reality, in order to allow communities to prototype their futures and then see that if I do this, this is the outcome. So for us, that's like the exciting point is I think what everyone is talking about here is taking these STEM goals and then allowing them to be group experiences through emerging media.
Yeah, I think the emerging, immersive experiences where people can feel it, they can imagine it, I think is really going to expedite, this process. And maybe for Kevin, the Sustainability Consortium, what are you seeing in the STEM fields? Do you see them obviously merging with more sustainability principles? Is that, where we're heading, in your minds? Or where are we at right now?
Well, I will say that one thing that corporations and NGOs look to universities for is being a fair and objective broker of scientific evidence and knowledge. And so, all of you in sustainability know there's no black and white answers. There's trade in these complex systems. There's trade-offs, no matter what issue you're looking at. I was pitching a story to ASU Media this week. They wanted somebody to write a story on whether fake or real Christmas trees were greener. And you can go out and look, there's zillions of newspaper articles already on that, and there's all sorts of trade-offs, right? It depends on whether you compost the tree or not. It depends on whether you use your fake plastic tree for 10 years or not, et cetera. So I think that external partners want to have a place where they can converse with one another in a safe way and have science guide those conversations. And that's why I think that TSC has succeeded, and I would set out a call to universities in general that we can be that place, not just where tough technical problems or social problems are solved, but actually where these controversies that exist because of the trade-offs can be fairly mediated.
Yeah, I totally agree that the space and the place, I was at a tribal conference and they called it ethical space, like to where you're reserving this space to try to leave biases behind, but be authentic, be honest, be candid, and even, vulnerable with your emotions of being like, hey, this is a big problem, I'm worried about this. And so that's, I think, critically important is to allow even corporations to express their concerns authentically, even though it's like, oh, this may be against our, our bottom line or, some of our, long-term goals, but we're really worried about these things. And so I really appreciate that. And so, Sarah, what do you see, what are some of the challenges you face when engaging students with sustainability issues through a STEM lens?
One of the questions I receive a lot is, okay, I've learned this knowledge, I have this, curated class set, then what? How do I actually take that and be really actionable about that? The beauty of a university and any sort of STEM education is it's grounded heavily in theory and sort of these conceptual frameworks, essential, right? We have to go out into the world with some sort of underpinning. And when I work with students, I really try to help them engage with what are their actionable steps, sort of what you were talking about, that transition period from the university to sort of the broader practice arena. And even in practice, right, I'm still a practitioner, and that's something really vital to me, is that how can we create very clear systems of actions that don't feel, not every action has to be sort of a huge sea change, if you will, but they can be very small scale action steps and sort of practice-based within that sort of lens.
Yeah, I think it's very important to have that practical lens to go along with those students. Ashley, for you, what does GLS students learn in your programs?
Yeah, so really we teach them the Greenlight Guidelines project management process, and that takes their projects from ideation through implementation. So again, just teaching them how to make these sustainability solutions work in the real world. And a lot of, it's really interesting. I've been a part of over 50 of these projects, And every set of students that we get kind of has the same type of challenges. It's really interesting. But those small things that we kind of take for granted that you learn during your first job are, things like the students will say, oh, I reached out to 7 recyclers, none of them replied, oh, the project's over. Okay, well, the power of the follow-up, and let me review your email. Let's completely change this. I wouldn't have replied to that email either, right? So it's just, learning those things that really are those really important pieces that will make a project move forward or not, that we might take for granted as professionals, but students walk away from our program with. If students leave our program with experience on their resume, relevant experience, with a new skill set, confidence in those skills, a wider network, and a project portfolio, multiple portfolios to be able to show their credibility of their work and tell a compelling sustainability narrative, then we've done our job.
Alrighty. Yeah, we're excited about your job, and you guys just had your 10-year anniversary in April?
Mm-hmm.
And so how has that been, just to follow up, how has that been, getting to that benchmark? That 10 years is really significant, actually.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we started with the student-led project program, and now we have 6 different programs. We have our job placement program, where we actually work to get our students hired after they graduate. Sustainability seminars. We have our green event services. Over the past year, we've diverted over 10 tons from the landfill in our green event services. So. I think just over the past 10 years, our student-led projects has just expanded as we've had all these conversations with these dozens of businesses that we've helped go green, just meeting their needs in different ways and expanding our program suite to meet those needs.
All right, thank you for that. And so, Nicholas, what emerging technologies or innovations do you believe hold the most promise for advancing sustainability goals?
I mean, I'm really interested in, of course, all of the hot topic technologies like artificial intelligence. Actually, Sarah and I are developing our own NLP model currently. But there's also problems with these technologies, right? So, for instance, like AI for 1 hour of use, ChatGPT is 10 gigawatts of energy. Our brains are 10 watts for that hour. So I think a lot of we need to be thoughtful before we implement the technology. That technology is not going to be that solution, but thoughtful discourse mediated through a technology that makes people want to move into action is the answer. There's some more, I think, bespoke technologies that are really, really important and kind of do this process of moving empathy into action that I care a lot about. The first is, I think, a lot of immersive technologies that link your user input to your day into kind of taking somebody's story and connecting that to your life. And I think across a lot of, majority of people now have watch bands that are monitoring all of our biometric data and telling us about ourselves. I'm interested in kind of the smaller technologies that are going to kind of take and analyze our lifestyle and then compare that into more grand narratives. So from my perspective, we need to think about 2 things. One is we need to think about thinking before we apply any story into technology. And then, again, the most important thing is we want stories told through technology that are going to create some sort of civic discourse. Because I think that we already know the problems. I mean, we do. Everyone in this room knows the problems. And so you can do 2 things. One is you can hit someone over the head with that knowledge. Sometimes that works. But the more practical one, I think, is you engage someone in a conversation. And a conversation where 2 needs that are sometimes seemingly incommensurate can go through a process back and forth interactively until a solution that neither you nor them thought could happen. And these technologies move so fast that they can actually mediate that. And that's what I'm interested in.
Yeah, I think there's just so much opportunity there. It's hard to comprehend. I wanted to follow up on your AI statement there. You know, can you repeat the wattage per hour between our brain and the AI?
10 watts for the brain, 10 gigawatts for the GPU that's working. I don't even understand 10 gigawatt or 10 gigawatts. I have no idea what that even equates to, but it certainly is way less than kind of our own intuitions, suppositions, deep thinking.
10 gigawatts.
Yeah.
That's an exponential order factor more. And so when I think of that is like, does AI need a governor? One, you know, it needs a throttle, you know, because people are just randomly creating content and I've used AI quite a bit.
And me too, yeah.
You know, to test it and see what it's capable, but it's produced a lot of crap.
For sure,
you know?
for sure. Yeah, like that's something that isn't necessarily, you know, we're talking about the ethics of AI, and we can talk until, you know, the sun comes up and down for the next year about that. But there's very few pools that are actually thinking about how do we actually think about this from a sustainability standpoint, and what is the governor on this so we're not using too much energy, asking like, you know, what would Chewbacca look like if Chewbacca was a kitty? You know, like great thing, but it might not be worth the tremendous amount of computation in order to answer that question. And that's a question that we have. Like what is the percentage? You know, these things can solve problems that are so complex that maybe we can't, but we can ask it these questions, and it can kind of map out answers through and connect streams in ways that our brains simply can't, and that's really, really cool. So and that will lead to sustainability solutions, but we do have to think very, very thoughtfully on how we're implementing it.
And it just makes me think of, we don't really value energy very much, you know, and that's, you know, one of the root causes of some of our challenges with energy is that we just expect the lights to turn on. You know, we just expect abundant energy to be everywhere, as opposed to valuing, you know, these tremendous services and these tremendous technologies, you know, that we've built and designed.
Yeah, I mean, even the technologies that Sarah and I use in our lab is, you know, they have a product cycle of 8 months, year and a half if we're lucky, and then these are pushed, and then it's an adoption program. And I think that there's some really cool things that are being done, like, you know, the right to upgrade and do your own service that's happening in Europe currently, where you're able to actually fix your technology. That's really, really important, and that gives people hope. You know, I have this thing, and you grow attached to it, and you can change it and upgrade it. That's a great thing, and we can be doing those things here. And particularly in a lot of these emerging technologies, they can all be scaled out from a manufacturing plant standpoint, and you can quickly just change out a GPU, or you can quickly just change out a small piece. These are modular, they can be, and this is a really low-hanging fruit for the industry.
Yeah, and we'll segue to Kevin here. As a leader in sustainability research, you know, what do you see as the key role of, you know, STEM fields in addressing, you know, not only global but local sustainability challenges?
Well, I'll go back to AI in particular. I think that as we begin to throw AI at climate modeling and prediction itself, we will get better foreshadowing of tipping points. We will get more accurate predictions of relatively shorter term impacts. You know, I remember when I started watching climate vloggers on YouTube, and you could see that it began, the definition of a climate scientist and a weather person began to merge, right? And you have these climate scientists basically, well, in the next 3 months, here's what's going to happen because of the climate. I think that our most vexing sustainability problem is food security. To me, that's number one on the list. Food security is what will cause, the mass migrations that will occur and that we're not socially or politically ready for, and that's quite obvious. And agriculture is the most place-based, highly contextual process that we do. There's no such thing as a best practice in agriculture, right? It depends on your soil, it depends what you're growing, it depends on the season, the weather. And so I think throwing AI, as developed countries at least begin to throw AI and big data, that we will get much better agricultural yield. I would like to see my dream technology, if we could do carbon capture at scale, and it wasn't tying us into 500 years of doing carbon capture, that would be exciting. But my next dream would be that we move food out of the farm, because we just simply don't have the soil quality and the land that we need to meet our future food security needs. It's been estimated, for example, that by 2030, we have to increase our yield of coffee by 300%, by 3x, even though the amount of land that we have that is arable for growing coffee is going down because of climate change, and the arable land that's opening up is on mountaintops where we would be deforesting. And so I don't know how we're all going to get our coffee that we want, and in the end, we're all going to be a little bit inconvenienced.
And a little grumpy.
A little grumpier.
Yeah, that's a great point, and that's why we start with food systems at the Carbon Summit. Is my green thumb is food is what brings people to the table. And so if we can agree on good food as the starting point, and healthy food is our energy and our fuel, that's context. Especially in agriculture, like you said, that's where this started, is with agricultural guys, because it's very peer-based. Like you said, the best practices are difficult because usually it's generational methodologies, generational knowledge that's passed down from grandfather to son, to grandson, and this is how we've always done it. And so may not necessarily be the best way to do it. Yeah. And so things are changing. In the 1930s, I think it was 25% of the U.S. population was in agriculture. Now it's less than 1.5%. So we're depending on that 1.5% to, feed a tremendous amount of people. So that's a lot of pressure, on them. You have a...
No, this is a really interesting question, and at least from a storytelling perspective, is we need to engage these communities in these conversations. My grandfather's a farmer. He can literally pick up soil and let you know how much, and taste it, and let you know how much nitrogen is in the soil. It's amazing, right? This is kind of like a generational thing. And a lot of these farmers that I come from an agricultural community, they want to solve these problems. And to your point about food, and yours also, this is a really great place to start. It's something that we can agree upon. And so what I'm interested in, at least for the whole panel, is, where are those touch points in which we have, a wicked problem, but everyone's personal narrative kind of goes through that river. And if we can find enough of those, I'm interested in this, because that's one, but there's probably 50, and all of those can require a story that it's going to mobilize some people into doing next steps.
And one of the things that I do for me is when I'm in Cottonwood, I have a grandmother who doesn't walk very well, almost handicapped, and so she has a hard time getting groceries. So I volunteer at the food bank, and not only do I help supplement her groceries, but I get plugged into the community there. And so we get to see, who needs these services, and you get to connect with, quote unquote, the weak links of the community, because the community is only as strong as its weakest links, right? And when we're down here in Phoenix and we see, the homeless populations and maybe the underprivileged, I guess you could say, there's tremendous needs here, and so how do we frame these conversations and tell these stories. What maybe for you, Sarah, like the inverse of the last question is, what are the opportunities, that we have for engaging students through sustainability, looking through a STEM lens? Maybe those touch points, to talk about Nicholas's point. Where are those opportunities?
I think about this a little bit as a scale question. Kevin, you brought up this idea of modeling and how we think about some of these questions on sort of a global scalar level. And actually, I like to also, that's one part, right? Because these are global problems. Supply chain, agriculture, these are inherently global problems. The other side of that is sort of the community piece that you're talking about, which I always like to argue that people are data. And so and that sort of gets into that framework of storytelling, which is how can we draw out those personal narratives, but actually assess that from sort of a data perspective to say, these are the needs of sort of the nuanced cultural needs of a community, and understand that perspective to help meet those larger scalar questions at a global level. And I think that's a really important piece to remember in these questions, because as soon as we start thinking at carbon reduction, what does that mean for sort of an individual community level, sort of this weakest link as you're describing it? And we have to meet those two pieces. And education is certainly a beautiful avenue in which to assess and sort of move that, because when we think about knowledge share and sort of knowledge transference, a place like the university is and can be sort of a neutral center to help create that exchange of knowledge and sort of meet the demands of these different scale questions. And of course, STEM is a part of all of that in the way we think about it and sort of conceptualize some of these questions.
Yeah, I think it's really important to test and prototype and iterate locally to where we can generate these, scaled solutions. And I think that's what makes, ASU and, obviously City of Tempe, the lab and the experiments, at the same time, because, we do have a tremendous need here, right, being the hottest city in the U.S. And so, Ashley, for you, as a social entrepreneur and an executive director, what tips do you have for, your students or potential students that are coming into your organization who may be listening today?
Yeah, so for the students listening, I'd say one is, I wouldn't say network, but build relationships. I always tell students, hey, if you don't know anyone in your classes, you're doing something wrong. Talk to these people, build lasting relationships. Who are the people that you want to have in your corner 5, 10, 20 years down the line that you can call on and collaborate with? These might not be people that you would hang out with on the weekends, right? But, how can you build those lasting relationships? Because these are going to be the people fighting the fight just like you. So build those relationships. And then second is getting mentors. So not only ask for those 15-minute informational interviews, but at the end of that interview, ask, hey, what can I do for you? And then when it's that reciprocal conversation, that reciprocal value being transferred, then you as a student move from mentee to collaborator or student to colleague. And then keep in touch with those mentors, because again, these are people you want in your corner that you can then call on to collaborate with and do great things with, years down the line. And then last but not least is, it sounds cheesy, I guess, but be bold. So I think a lot of the time when you're in these big classes and maybe you might not speak up in your classes or don't ask for permission. Ask questions, try new things. Don't be afraid to, experiment and really just go forth and be bold.
And just to, kind of reinforce that, oftentimes people don't think about, like when you ask for permission, you're actually giving them the ability to say no. And so that's when you say, ask the questions, and so you're preparing, you're anticipating, a deflection or, maybe not the answer that you want. And so that's an approach that I've taken, and it's a balance for sure, because you don't want to step on people's toes, you don't want to be offensive, but at the same time you have to move things forward. And so that boldness is really important, but it is a balance. And so you will make mistakes, you will probably step on some people's toes at times, but as long as you're not doing it maliciously, with the right intentions, like you can apologize, or you can explain why you're doing those things. And then maybe for you, Nicholas, how important it is it with your guys' lab, as explaining it is one thing, but when they come in, do you see aha moments, with students or even external partners when they come in and see what you're working on?
Yeah. So there's a couple things. First, I want to go back to your point before I answer this question, because and in yours also, there is this thing, particularly as students, it's your job. And saying this as a professor, like, it's my job to create a lesson plan. It's your job to push back to me also. And that's, it can't just be this transference of knowledge of us speak. Like, there's so many problems that we have no idea how to solve. And we can't solve it unless these classrooms become dynamic. So that's like the one thing that I love, is when students actually break the rule. And it's like, oh, you thought about it this way, but I'm thinking about it this way. And great, I'm going to try to create a maneuver that marries what I think you want with what I think needs to happen. That's always the most exciting thing. So that's a really lovely response you had. To answer the question along the lines of aha moments, we just did this really great youth engagement program with the potential future ideas that could maybe work into the master plan for this for the city of Mesa. And the technology had rendered, we had rendered these giant, very similar to this dome, but probably much larger in scale. And you could walk into it and you would be able to immersively see what the city would look like. And simply by showing, something like what desert adaptive trees could look like in a community center versus shade structures versus nothing, or what is present, you get these aha moments, right? So there is ways that these technologies can render ideas for conversations. And the interesting thing is, once those ideas happen, they're actually almost always wrong, right? That's a good thing. That's not a bad thing. The good thing is we've given you something else to think about, and now let's have a conversation and prototype from there. And so that's, to me, the best aha moments are, aha, that's a great direction, but if it's only like this, and then someone else kind of pushing it and bringing it somewhere else, and that's kind of our goal, is to create that space of play. So then, because we don't have things fully figured out, nobody does, but I think all of us do, if we have a way of doing so.
Just to add to that, I also think, in what you were saying too, there's this really important space, particularly when you're emerging from any place in your life of new knowledge, and that space to fail. And I think, you talked about entrepreneurship just, half an hour ago, and that is essential to being entrepreneurial, to being creative, to coming up with new ideas, to imagining differently. It's actually failing and having a lot of really bad ideas before you have a good one. But that often feels very scary, and you have to be very vulnerable in that moment. But the important part of that is you generate conversation. And actually, the conversation is where the really good stuff happens, particularly from a solutions-oriented perspective. And so this project Nick and I were or what he was just describing, I think the important part is that we saw young people, and this was high school age community, they were having a lot of really bad ideas, just throwing them out. And it was amazing, because what we started to see emerge was that they were discussing different pathways of solutions, but also being really entrepreneurial in kind of what you were describing, Ashley, about about asking those questions in order to define their role. And that aha moment came when we heard them walk out and say, oh, I would love to be an urban planner, or I'd love to get into sustainability, or, right? That's really empowering for them to feel like they have a voice in that space too. And I think that transcends to every type of environment, hopefully, but is a really important piece to how do you cultivate a space where aha moments can emerge.
Yeah, people want to speak and be heard, and listening is obviously really important. So, Kevin, I'll ask you, like, as a a researcher or somebody who's been in the sustainability space for a while, how important is the interdisciplinary collaboration, to foster the education and the awareness piece of sustainability?
Every sustainability problem has probably, a business, a psychology, a sociology, an engineering, a science component to it. And so that's really the nature of all our problems, not just sustainability right now. I did want to kind of follow up on the advice to students. And so, if you think about where, as a population, we are at in terms of skill and interest and capability to make a difference in sustainability, all of you, you think about where am I in that curve? All of you are in that top 90th percentile. We could go back to the first generation 20 years ago when GFL or Geo started and stuff, right? And those were those were the pioneers. Those were the 1%ers. And they were going to pick up on sustainability because it was novel. It didn't matter. They knew it was the right thing to do, but it didn't matter if it had any practical reality to it. They loved the idea of the novelty of addressing sustainability issues. We're now in generation 2. We're in that next 10%. This is we're still in the elite group. And you might think, well, geez, if I'm an early adopter, and if I'm in that 10%, then my job is to get the other 90% to follow me. I need to be a leader and get everyone else to follow me. No. This won't work with 10% leading the 90%. As this generation 2, your job is to reach out and empower generation 3, that next 40% of the population that's then going to get us to the tipping point where it really does become a norm. We're not there yet, but we have to use our opportunity to create spaces where people who are just getting into this field can have the opportunity to lead.
Okay, we're closing in, but let's do some final remarks here. If you had to tell the audience, some closing remarks on how you feel, or what we can look forward to in the sustainability field. What would that be to maybe those future students? And it's just kind of a general open question, I guess you could say.
The biggest trend that we see in the business world right now is the move from voluntary compliance to regulated compliance. And so sustainability is no longer only a market issue where a company can decide or not decide whether to play. The reality is that the market's not going quick enough, and so we have and need policy to bring up the bottom. And so right now we see a lot of legal team. We see, for example, corporate sustainability teams being moved under legal because of the regulated component here.
And just to riff off of that, I think there's now sort of a cultural demand for this that there hasn't been. Your conversation about phasing of generation 2 now moving into 3, that particularly after the past 3+ years, there's now cultural understanding around the adaptation and sort of mitigation debate / conversation to think about this. And that's really important because that will help drive the market and particularly the policy implementation. Without that, it's really hard to get politicians to sort of make those choices and vice versa, right, to help implement behavior change. And that's a big part of it too. So I think it goes both ways, certainly.
I mean, I'm most excited for by whom is stepping into these seats. a lot of my work studies both social and environmental movements, and actually how they function, how they're successful, how they've been unsuccessful from a research perspective. The environmental movements that are currently happening, things like Sunrise Movement, are some of the most effective in terms of energy and recruitment. And I think that as people who are in this space, we need to listen to that. But we both need to listen to it and then create pathways into existing governance systems and existing systems of economy to take that and actually help bolster it through frameworks that are beyond anyone's control, really. And so for me, that's the space that I'm most excited for, is who's stepping into the seats. And I think we have a lot to learn. And it's our job to think about these constellations and connections that can be made between governments, business, activists, and that's the future, the connection points, the sinew.
Yeah, I mean, you all said it best. I'm just inspired by each and every student that goes through our program. They're all so brilliant and passionate and have the tools to make a difference and have such bright futures in front of them. So yeah, I'm inspired by that, just seeing the incredible work that they're going to do. And just the understanding that now we're all understanding that sustainability is for everyone, interdisciplinary, every sector, every job function. And I'm really excited for how that will take shape as well.
And I think it's really important to remember that these young people, their bandwidth is tremendous. To where that they can scroll and consume and absorb. It's debatable whether they're absorbing good or bad information, but their capacity to absorb this information is tremendous. And so I want to thank you guys for rounding out our panels at the Carbon Summit. Let's give them a round of applause here. So we got one more keynote, and then we got one more pitch, and then we are wrapped up at the Carbon Summit. So we're going to keep this train rolling. Thank you guys again so much for being involved here. What lively conversations we've had.